November 17, 1962. Vienna, Austria. Oscar Nichols stared at the chessboard, contemplating his next move. The cafe bustled with the evening crowd, tourists, locals, and the occasional businessman. 3 weeks into his first overseas posting, he still hadn't quite acclimated to Vienna's particular blend of imperial grandeur and Cold War tension. "Your move, American," said the man across from him in accented English. Dmitri Petrov, cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy, which everyone knew meant KGB. They had met by chance 4 days earlier at this same cafe, when Oscar had been looking for a quiet place to read intelligence briefings disguised as economic reports. Petrov had invited himself to Oscar's table, challenged him to chess, and somehow they'd fallen into a routine of evening games. Oscar moved his bishop, immediately regretting it. "Interesting choice," Petrov said, quickly capturing Oscar's knight. "You CIA men always sacrifice too readily." Oscar froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I work for the Commerce Department." "Of course you do." Petrov smiled thinly. "And I am merely interested in promoting Soviet ballet performances." Oscar maintained his cover, but inwardly he was calculating how badly he'd been compromised. 3 months of training at Camp Peary hadn't prepared him for being made so quickly. His assignment was simple: establish a commercial cover while making contacts with Austrian officials who might provide intelligence on Soviet bloc economic activities. Low-risk, entry-level field work. "Don't worry," Petrov continued quietly. "If I wanted to expose you, we wouldn't be playing chess. I simply appreciate knowing whom I'm playing against." Later that night, Oscar composed his report in the small apartment provided by the agency. He debated whether to mention the chess games with Petrov. Fraternization with known Soviet intelligence officers was strictly forbidden without prior authorization. But something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the way Petrov had spoken, not triumphant at identifying him, but almost collegial. Oscar decided to omit the encounter from his report. Just this once. February 8, 1963. Vienna. "Your wife is very beautiful," Oscar said, nodding to the photograph Petrov had shown him. 3 months of weekly chess games had evolved into something neither man openly acknowledged: a cautious friendship. "Valentina is everything to me," Petrov replied. "She remains in Moscow with our son. The party doesn't approve of bringing families to foreign postings unless you're very senior." The unspoken truth hung between them. Valentina was effectively a hostage, ensuring Petrov's loyalty while abroad. Oscar recognized the tactic from his training. "And you, Oscar? No sweetheart back home?" Oscar hesitated. Agency policy discouraged sharing personal details, but after months of these meetings, the strict compartmentalization was wearing thin. "There was someone, Victoria. It ended when I took this assignment." "Ah, the sacrifices we make," Petrov said, moving his rook. "Check." Oscar moved his king out of danger. "It wasn't the distance. She couldn't handle not knowing what I really did. The lies. The first casualty of our profession." Petrov nodded. "Trust." Outside, snow fell on Vienna's imperial streets. The cafe was warm, the coffee rich and dark. For brief moments, Oscar could forget they were adversaries in a global conflict that threatened nuclear annihilation. "Do you ever question it?" Oscar asked suddenly. "What we do?" Petrov studied him carefully. "Questions are dangerous, my friend, particularly for those on my side of the board." "Of course," Oscar replied quickly. "Forget I asked." Petrov leaned forward. "The day I stop questioning is the day I become truly dangerous," he said so quietly Oscar barely heard him. "Remember that." June 12, 1963. Vienna. Oscar's supervisor, Regional Director Calloway, summoned him to the embassy. "You've been made, Nichols," Calloway said without preamble, tossing a file onto the desk. The Soviets know your agency. Oscar maintained his composure while his mind raced. Had Petrov reported him after all? How can you be sure, sir? We have a source inside their embassy. They've had you marked as CIA since November. November, their first chess game. Petrov had known from the beginning. I want you to use this, Calloway continued. Your contact with this Petrov character. Feed him false information. We're calling it Operation Checkmate. Oscar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Sir, I haven't reported any contact with Soviet personnel. Calloway's expression hardened. I'm aware of that, Nichols. A serious violation of protocol. However, your little chess club gives us an opportunity. The Soviets think they're running you, but we're going to flip the script. Oscar left the embassy with a hollow feeling in his stomach. The agency wanted him to deceive Petrov, the man who had known his true identity all along but had kept their friendship private. Who had shared photos of his family, his doubts, his chess strategies. Who had somehow become the person Oscar most looked forward to seeing in Vienna. That night, Oscar couldn't sleep. The moral calculus of espionage had seemed clearer during training. America versus the Soviets. Democracy versus communism. But Petrov wasn't just the Soviets anymore. He was a man with a wife he missed and a chess game that slightly favored aggressive opening moves. Oscar had been trained to manipulate assets, find their vulnerabilities, their desires, their fears. But he couldn't bring himself to see Petrov that way. Not anymore. October 28, 1963. Vienna. You seem troubled today, Petrov said as they sat at their usual table. Outside, autumn painted Vienna in red and gold. Oscar moved his pawn without much thought. The information he'd been ordered to feed Petrov, about non-existent NATO missile deployments in Turkey, weighed on him. Intelligence that could escalate tensions just a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis had nearly led to nuclear war. Just work, Oscar replied. Ah yes, the Commerce Department must be very demanding. The gentle mockery in Petrov's voice made Oscar's decision for him. Dmitri, I need to tell you something, but not here. They walked along the Danube as twilight settled over the city. Oscar explained Calloway's operation without directly mentioning the false intelligence. They want me to use our friendship, he finished. Petrov was quiet for a long moment. I suspected as much. My superiors have made similar suggestions. Oscar stopped walking. You've been asked to feed me false information too? Of course. Why else would they permit our meetings to continue? They believe I am cultivating you as an asset. They both laughed, a bitter sound carried away by the autumn wind. So we're both supposed to be deceiving each other, Oscar said. The perfect symmetry of our Cold War. Petrov turned to face the river. What will you tell your superiors? I don't know yet. The truth was, Oscar had begun to dread his reports back to Langley almost as much as he dreaded lying to Petrov. What about you? I will tell them what they expect to hear, that you seem receptive to sharing information, that I am making progress. Petrov turned back to him, his expression grave. But we must be careful now. They will be watching more closely. January 17, 1964. Vienna. Oscar was waiting at their regular table when Petrov arrived late, his face drawn and pale. What's happened? Oscar asked immediately. Not here, Petrov murmured, leaving money for their untouched coffee. They walked through the Stat Park, taking a circuitous route to avoid potential surveillance. Petrov checked repeatedly for tails, his tradecraft suddenly visible in a way it hadn't been before. I intercepted a cable, Petrov finally said when they reached a secluded area. Your false information about the Turkey deployments. It's been taken seriously in Moscow. Oscar felt his blood run cold. How seriously? Serious enough that certain hardliners are pushing for preemptive strikes to neutralize the non-existent missiles. Petrov's voice was tight, and serious enough that my superiors are beginning to wonder why such important information came through a cultural attaché's chess partner rather than established intelligence channels. Christ, Oscar muttered. What do we do? I've been recalled to Moscow for consultation. I leave tomorrow. Consultation could mean many things in Soviet bureaucracy, none of them good for Petrov. Is it because of me? Because you didn't deliver enough intelligence? Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply want a debriefing. Petrov didn't sound convinced by his own words. But if I don't return to Vienna, the unfinished sentence hung in the frigid air. There must be something we can do, Oscar said desperately. There is. Petrov handed him a small piece of paper. This is where Valentina and my son Mikhail live in Moscow. If something happens to me, they will be punished as well. The family of a traitor. Oscar stared at the address. What are you asking me to do? Nothing now. But if I don't return within 1 month, I need you to get a message to your superiors. The CIA has extraction capabilities in Moscow. Safe houses. Networks. You want us to extract your family? Dmitri, that's impossible? Perhaps. But I have something to offer in exchange. Petrov explained that his real position gave him access to the names of Soviet deep-cover agents in Western Europe, illegals living under false identities, some planted decades ago. I can provide their identities, their locations, their assignments. Over 30 assets placed throughout NATO countries. In exchange for my family's safety. Oscar knew what this meant. Petrov wasn't just risking his life. He was betraying everything he had served. All for the chance to save his wife and son from the consequences of his own suspected disloyalty. I'll do everything I can, Oscar promised. But Dmitri, be careful in Moscow. Always, my friend. Petrov managed to smile. We will continue our chess game when I return. They both knew it was unlikely. February 28, 1964. Vienna. 1 month passed with no word from Petrov. Oscar had gone to their cafe every evening, hoping. He'd filed carefully worded reports, hinting that his Soviet contact had gone silent while minimizing their personal connection. Calloway had seemed unsurprised, even satisfied, as if Petrov's disappearance somehow validated American intelligence methods. That morning, Oscar finally made the decision. He requested an urgent meeting with Calloway and brought Petrov's offer. The identities of Soviet illegals in exchange for extracting Valentina and Mikhail. Absolutely not, Calloway said after Oscar explained. We don't risk assets and networks for the family of a KGB officer. But the intelligence value could be significant or could be disinformation. Either way, the risk outweighs the potential benefit. Calloway studied Oscar with new suspicion. Your judgment is compromised, Nichols. I'm pulling you from Vienna. Report to Langley for reassignment. Oscar left the embassy knowing his career at the agency was effectively over. The best he could hope for was a desk job analyzing agricultural reports from behind the Iron Curtain. The worst was an internal investigation into his relationship with Petrov. None of that mattered now. He had made a promise. March 15, 1964. West Berlin. Oscar crossed through Checkpoint Charlie with his diplomatic passport, heart pounding. After his dismissal from Vienna, he had taken leave rather than returning directly to Langley. Officially, he was touring Europe before his reassignment. Unofficially, he had made contact with an old training colleague now stationed in Berlin, Victoria O'Malley. This is insane, Oscar, Victoria said as they met in a safe house in the American sector. You're talking about an unsanctioned extraction from Moscow. Do you understand what happens if you're caught? If I'm caught helping you, I know exactly what's at stake, Oscar replied. That's why I came to you. You're the only person I trust who has the connections to make this work. Victoria had been assigned to the Berlin station's exfiltration team, the specialists who occasionally helped defectors escape from East Germany. She had access to the networks, the safe houses, the transportation methods. Even if I wanted to help, she said, extracting people from Moscow is completely different from getting someone across the Berlin Wall. The security is exponentially tighter. The consequences. I promised him, Victoria. Something in Oscar's voice made her pause. You really cared about this KGB officer, didn't you? He was my friend. The simplicity of the statement belied its weight. And now his family will suffer because he tried to prevent an escalation based on false intelligence that I provided. Victoria was silent for a long moment. I can't authorize agency resources for this, but I might know someone. A Polish smuggler who works both sides of the Iron Curtain. If anyone can get a message to Moscow, it's him. April 3rd, 1964. Moscow. Valentina Petrova opened her apartment door to find a middle-aged woman claiming to be from the building management, there to inspect the heating system. Once inside, the woman slipped Valentina a note. Your husband sent friends. If you wish to leave, bring only what you can carry. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., visit the Lenin Museum. Wear red scarf. Valentina's hands trembled as she read the message. There had been no word from Dmitri for over 2 months. Officials had told her only that he was assisting with an important investigation. She knew what that usually meant. The decision took her less than a minute. With Mikhail beside her, she burned the note and began planning what they would take. April 4th, 1964. Moscow. The Lenin Museum was crowded with school groups and foreign tourists. Valentina clutched 7-year-old Mikhail's hand tightly, the red scarf around her neck feeling like a beacon. They wandered through the exhibits, appearing to any observer as a mother educating her son about the founder of Soviet socialism. Excuse me, a voice said in accented Russian. A tall man with glasses was standing beside them. American or perhaps British, dressed like a professor. Could you direct me to the display about the 1917 revolution? The recognition phrase. Valentina felt lightheaded with fear and relief. Of course, we were just heading there ourselves. They followed the man to a service exit where a museum worker was waiting with a maintenance cart. Valentina and Mikhail were quickly covered with tarps among cleaning supplies and wheeled to a service entrance, then transferred to a delivery van. The journey was a blur of fear and hope. They were moved between vehicles, given new clothes, new identification papers. They spent 2 nights in a cramped safe house somewhere on the outskirts of Moscow. Valentina recognized the tradecraft from what Dmitri had occasionally let slip about his work. The counter-surveillance measures, the cutouts, the complete compartmentalization so that no one person knew the entire plan. On the 3rd day, they were driven to a remote area near the Finnish border, where they hiked through dense forest with a guide who spoke no Russian. By dawn, they had crossed into Finland. 3 days later, they were on a military transport plane to West Berlin. April 12, 1964. West Berlin. Oscar paced the safe house, chain-smoking cigarettes despite having quit years earlier. Victoria watched him from the small kitchen. They should have made contact by now, Oscar said for the 10th time. International exfiltration takes time, Victoria reminded him, especially with the extra precautions we've taken. The knock on the door made them both freeze. Victoria drew her sidearm while Oscar peered through the peephole. He threw the door open to see a woman with haunted eyes holding a young boy's hand. Behind them stood one of Victoria's contacts from the Polish network. Oscar recognized Valentina immediately from Petrov's photographs. Though she was thinner now, her face lined with strain. "You are Oscar?" she asked in tentative English. "Yes," he managed to say. "You're safe now." The boy, Mikhail, stared up at him with solemn eyes that reminded Oscar painfully of Petrov. "Dmitri? My husband?" Valentina asked. Oscar exchanged a glance with Victoria. "We don't know yet, but we're still trying to find out." That night, after Valentina and Mikhail had been settled into more permanent accommodations, Oscar and Victoria sat drinking whiskey in the safe house. "What you did was reckless, unauthorized, and probably treasonous," Victoria said, pouring them each another finger of bourbon. "And I'm still not sure why I helped you." Oscar stared into his glass. "Because sometimes the mission isn't as important as the people. That kind of thinking doesn't work in our business, Oscar. You know that. Maybe our business needs to change." May 23, 1964. Langley, Virginia. Oscar sat across from Deputy Director Phillips in a windowless room at CIA headquarters. His disciplinary hearing had lasted 3 days, with testimony about his unauthorized actions in Vienna, Berlin, and, by proxy, Moscow. "The review board has reached its decision, Mr. Nichols," Phillips said gravely. "Under normal circumstances, your actions would result in immediate dismissal and possible criminal charges." Oscar nodded, resigned to his fate. "However, these are not normal circumstances." Phillips slid a folder across the desk. "The intelligence provided by Mrs. Petrova regarding Soviet illegals has proven extraordinarily valuable. 3 deep-cover agents have already been identified and placed under surveillance." Oscar stared at the folder but didn't open it. "Additionally," Phillips continued, "we've received communication from our counterparts suggesting a potential exchange." Oscar looked up sharply. "Petrov? He's alive, currently being held in Lubyanka prison on suspicion of espionage. The Soviets are willing to trade him for a physicist we arrested last year." Hope surged through Oscar. "So he'll be released? That's where you come in. The exchange needs to be handled delicately. Despite your unorthodox methods, you have established rapport with both Petrov and his family. We'd like you to coordinate the exchange." "You're not firing me?" Phillips allowed himself a thin smile. "Let's call it reassignment to a special project. After which, we'll revisit your future with the agency." June 15, 1964. Glienicke Bridge, Berlin. The Bridge of Spies stretched between West Berlin and Potsdam in the East German territory. Dawn mist still clung to the Havel River below as Oscar waited with a small team of CIA personnel. On the eastern side, he could make out a similar group of figures. Valentina and Mikhail remained in the car, out of sight. Oscar hadn't told them about the exchange, fearing it might fall through at the last minute. Such arrangements often did. A black Volga approached the eastern checkpoint, and Oscar held his breath. The Soviet physicist they were trading, Dr. Leonov, sat in the back seat of an American sedan behind him, flanked by 2 agents. The cars from both sides stopped at their respective ends of the bridge. Through binoculars, Oscar could see a gaunt figure emerge from the Volga, his once robust frame now skeletal. Even at a distance, the slumped shoulders and defeated posture were unmistakable. The exchange proceeded with the mechanical precision of a ritual that both sides had perfected through repetition. Leonov walked east. Petrov walked west. Neither man looked back. As Petrov reached the midpoint of the bridge, Oscar could see his face clearly for the first time. His friend's cheeks were hollow, a fresh scar ran along his jawline, and his eyes held the vacant stare of someone who had endured prolonged interrogation. But when he spotted Oscar waiting at the western checkpoint, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, then disbelief. "Oscar," Petrov said hoarsely when he finally reached the western side. "How?" "Your family is safe," Oscar told him quickly. "They're here." At those words, Petrov's composure finally broke. He grasped Oscar's arms to steady himself, tears streaming down his face. "I told them nothing," he whispered fiercely. I never betrayed you. I know, Oscar said. Come on. There's someone waiting to see you. October 16, 1964. Washington, D.C. Oscar watched the television in his apartment with a tumbler of scotch in hand. Nikita Khrushchev had been removed from power, replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. The official Soviet announcement claimed Khrushchev had resigned due to advanced age and poor health, but Western intelligence knew better. The telephone rang, startling Oscar from his thoughts. Hello, are you watching the news? Petrov's voice came through the line, now speaking from his new home in Arlington, where he lived under the name Daniel Peters with Valentina and Mikhail. I am. Thoughts? Khrushchev's removal was planned for months. His handling of the missile crisis made him vulnerable, but it was the Turkey incident that sealed his fate. The Turkey incident, the false intelligence about NATO missiles that Oscar had been ordered to pass to Petrov, which had then been taken seriously in Moscow. The intelligence that had nearly triggered a Soviet first strike and had led to Petrov's recall and subsequent imprisonment when he tried to temper the hardliners' response. The war hawks used it to prove he was too soft on America, Petrov continued. Now Brezhnev will consolidate power with the military and KGB's blessing. Oscar swirled his scotch. And the Cold War gets colder. Perhaps. But remember what we prevented, my friend. After a moment of silence, Petrov added, Chess tomorrow? Mikhail wants a rematch. Wouldn't miss it, Oscar replied. As he hung up the phone, Oscar reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them here. A chance meeting in a Vienna cafe. A friendship that defied Cold War divisions. A loyalty that transcended national allegiances. Their small act of humanity hadn't ended the Cold War. The ideological conflict between East and West would continue for decades. But in one critical moment, when false intelligence might have triggered catastrophic escalation, their friendship had created just enough doubt, just enough delay, to prevent the worst. History would never record their names or the quiet way they had chosen people over ideology. The Cold War's official narrative would continue uninterrupted in history books. Yet Oscar knew that sometimes history's most consequential moments happen not in grand summit meetings, but in the simple human connections that reminded adversaries of their shared humanity. As night fell over Washington, Oscar raised his glass in a silent toast, to friendship in the shadows, to the small acts of conscience that occasionally changed the course of history without ever appearing in its pages.